Welcome to another episode of the Soul, Sovereignty, and Sexuality podcast with myself, Jessica Falcon, International Soul Embodiment Guide and Divine Feminine Activator, with a glorious guest today, Lisa Marie McCardle, and she is a pleasure priestess and intuitive. We both spoke at the Feminine Frequency Festival in December, and that's how we started to connect. We had a conversation and I just felt like there were so many synchronicities and like a soul remembrance. And we share many of the same guides and a similar passion to support the reclamation of the feminine as divine on this planet and through our bodies, through our sensuality and our sexuality, through pleasure and desire in a way that honors what the divine feminine truly is, which is life, right? The sacredness of life, the holiness of ourselves and our bodies. And so I really am excited to have you on as a guest, Lisa, and to talk about the goddess, meet the goddess. What is the goddess? What is the divine feminine? There's so much out there, a lot of images, right? Around what the goddess is. And I think that creates a lot of confusion because the goddess isn't a thing or an object or a commercial entity.
Like defining God. How do you define
Right.
God? God. How do you define such a thing?
And we can't, right? We experience her. But so this is for us to talk about how do we at least put word to some of these experiences and in these ways that we work with her so that you as the listener can either feel, sometimes it's nice to just feel affirmed in your own experiences because they can feel very different than what we're told is possible. And also to open up doors to new experiences with the goddess in your life. So let's start.
Let's dive in. Thanks for having me. I'm really honored to be here, Jessica. It's been a pleasure to walk this path with you, and I'm really honored to be here and activate the truth of what does the goddess really mean and how do we embody her?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How would you begin to answer that question?
Well, I would begin by saying the desire to know more, the desire, the leaning into what is divine feminine, what is goddess, what like the moment I find in this life, the moment we have an inquiry or a curiosity is the moment that the attunement to it is happening, right? So the moment the desire is there, it's already begun. And or else it would not be part of our inquiry or part of our reality. So I want to honor that if as their listeners are like, yes, I've been tuning into what is goddess frequency and how do I, it's already happening. So how do I define it? As I look at my own journey over many decades, I believe first and foremost, we're getting to this point in all things where we have these concepts of what something is and perceive it to be external of ourselves. Like the law of attraction, the goddess, our spirituality, all these things, like we see them as these things out here that we have to somehow come to be able to understand them. And the truth is that that's part of the illusion of our 3D living, that this is something that exists outside of us. So I believe what we get to do is honor that it is an expression of us. There's a chapter in my book called Embrace to Embody. Like we embrace these concepts. Now we're in the embodiment phase of becoming. So I see the goddess as, the feminine god, the true essence of divine femininity, the divine feminine. When I ask the goddess to support me, it is almost a prayer, as if I would offer it over to the universe for anything. And then when I receive magic and miracles and synchronicities and inspirations and things that you just can't make up, I'm very attuned to know that the goddess, God, universal creator experience is with me, is before me, and is creating in my favor. How do we embody that? What does it look like in body form? I think that's what we're going to get to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love keeping it open because to try to define the goddess, as you said, is trying to define God. It's trying to put in a box what cannot be contained. And every time I myself, because I'm like, well, I work with the goddess, I feel like I should try to have some way of describing the goddess, and I just don't. I've tried of even, I remember when I first started to receive visions or connection with the goddess, I still felt confused by what was happening and searching for a way to contain my experience rather than surrendering into the mystery, right? Which is part of the goddess, is the mystery, is the unknown, is the impermeable force that goes through every single aspect of existence, including us, as you said. And the goddess has also come in various forms to me. And what I felt, Isis in particular, the Egyptian queen of heaven and earth, mistress of magic, goddess of 10,000 names, she, for me, kept wanting me to understand that she was not to be worshipped, that she was not separate from me, that I was her, she was me, we were one, and that I was that divine, and that to look up to, like we're taught to do with God, right? Like to look up, to look out. To do that was denying the divine within me. And so for me, the main thing, which I love that you brought this up, that she kept telling me, showing me more through feeling state at that point, was, doing the work to embrace myself as that worthy.
Yeah. And as you're speaking, what transmitted through was you are in the frequency of the goddess when you are in your absolute glory. So the embodiment of that is when you're like, those moments, and we stretch those moments when you're like, I feel powerful. I feel glorious. I feel relaxed. I feel sexy. I feel beautiful. I feel unstoppable. I feel allowed. I feel like there's space for me. I feel like everything's working for me. And maybe we get that just for a glimmer, or maybe we stretch it into, a day, an hour, a week, a year, a lifetime. But that is the glorification of the goddess breathing through us when you're in the glory of knowing.
Mm-hmm. I've also, perhaps this is because I've worked primarily with dark goddesses, I also feel the goddess so deeply when I am in tremendous pain.
Yes, I agree.
Because, right, it's that part of welcoming the goddess into our lives is welcoming life, which is breathing into all that is, which is breathing into the pain as much as the joy, because they're so intertwined. We can't actually feel one without the other. And there have been moments when I just was able to lean into being held by something greater than myself when I didn't know any answers, and I didn't know if I could even feel the intensity of what was moving through me or the experience I was having. And the main thing that stopped me from feeling so completely lost was this knowingness of the goddess walking with me, in me, as me, next to me. And that was sometimes the only thing that literally got me through the darkest moments of my life.
Amen. And still in the apex of that surrender, you're surrendering to the glory. Right? Mm-hmm. Surrendering to the glory, no matter how dark it looks. There is a surrender to something that is greater. That is also the piece of ourselves in those moments we are believing we are unable to find or tap into.
Because, as you said, we have this idea of separation that has penetrated our planet for so long. And so when we are waiting for another event or circumstance to happen in our life, instead of surrendering deeply into the glory of what is, that's when we separate ourselves, right? And also makes me think about when I have felt the actual allowance of pain within me, because it's one thing to suffer needlessly or to play a victim spiral or to be locked into karma without consciousness, right? That's very different than actually feeling pain and actually being in an experience. And so when I've actually felt the pain and been in the experience, when I really think about it, it was because I loved so much. And it's the depth of that love that also created that pain, which is why so many people armor, right? But what we don't realize is that when we're armoring from pain, we're armoring from love simultaneously. And it was because I loved so much, and my heart just broke open wider and wider and wider every time I allowed myself to go there. And that brings me to one way that I like to speak of the goddess is love. Pure, raw, wild love, right?
Absolutely. And it's available all the time. You know, we just have to get out of the way and allow the true essence to be the predominant state. And I believe that kind of victim consciousness of suffering is an act of the mind. But when we are taken under into, which, you know, most of us on the planet have an experience of at some point. And I think there's different layers of that being taken under. You know, the journey of the last 3 years for me was, I mean, that's when the Dark Mothers initiated, when I was taken to the depths of a need to surrender and hand everything over, and loss that was more significant than I had ever had capacity to imagine as possible. That is when she came, and that requirement and that's not thought in the mind, it's a felt sense. It's when every part of you, it literally, it's on the knees, Jesus moment. It's that I have zero capacity to hold anything up in the face of this, and so I will surrender fully. And I think the more deeply we surrender, the more profoundly we get to understand what the goddess is. Because that's where she meets us. Not in the mind, but in the space of our body, in our knowing, in our vibratory frequency. It's a felt state.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely not with the mind. And it is felt. and often I like to ask the question of like, what are we surrendering to? What do we have faith in? What are we trusting? Right? Because we use these words a lot. Oh, just trust. Oh, have faith. Oh, let's surrender. Okay, great. For me, perhaps because my intellectual mind is so strong, but to be like, all right, so what exactly am I surrendering to? What am I actually having faith in? And now I would say I'm having faith in the divine that I am, which includes the divine in all things, which includes God, source, goddess. That intricate web of life that permeates all of life is something that I'm surrendering into. And the truth within me is what I'm surrendering into. And the knowing within me is what I'm surrendering into. And I'm surrendering into what is, right? To what is, because that's the only way anything can actually transform anyway, right? And that web of love, web of life that can hold me when I can't hold myself. And to know that I don't have to be in control of outcome, because there's something greater than my mind that is guiding me at every moment. And so the work then, which is also how I feel like we meet the goddess, is through knowing the depths of ourselves, like the depths of ourselves. And the greater I go within myself, the more I know myself, which is, it's like this never ending cave I enter, my body, myself, this energy within me, the energy that is me, the energy that encompasses me, right? That never ending cave for me is how I meet the goddess, because she meets me there inside of me, inside my body. And it's that I can know so deeply, and that then guides me to live from the inside out, right? To then live in that magical way, to then live in a way that is beyond my wildest imagination. And also to not need that to feel good, to not need that to feel joy, right? To not need that to feel peace, because it's the depths itself, that connection, that is the joy and the peace.
Beautifully stated. Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, and also something you said there, I believe that teaching of Isis is, even by the given name, that when we come into the space of acceptance, that it is as it is, the great alchemy can occur. When we see something simply as it is without trying to need to change it to feel better. And again, there's that mechanism of the mind trying to figure it out, or the state of grace. I see the goddess as the state of grace, powerful, mighty, destroyer and creator. But there's grace within it all. Spirit saying there is not one drop of wasted energy. And what I interpret wasted energy to be is when we're in the mechanism of the mind trying to figure it out. And the goddess has been saying through me for some time, you're never going to figure it out. That's not your mission. You're here to reconfigure it from within. So again, coming down into that space of, okay, this is simply is as it is. And in the alchemy of it, of acceptance, how do I allow for the full glory of what that is to be made manifest? Because everything is in divine and perfect order. And so what do we surrender to? What do we trust to? We surrender and we trust to a greater knowing that everything is as it is, and it is exactly as it is meant to be. And I know we've both experienced, as many on the planet, that those most uncomfortable spaces, those like, there's almost a synergy, the deeper, I've been pulled down, the more exalted the rise has been. And so, there's a temperature or a parameter, when we look back of like, how did this happen to me? Or how did this happen? And like the big transition pain points of life, the rebound is usually the most significant. And so sometimes we have to go to the core of dissolving to become something new, just like the chrysalis.
And we have to face the fears. We have to face the loss. We have to, right? That is how, it's how we reclaim our divine self and form. It's when we stop agreeing to those illusions of separation and death as a permanent ending, and that fear and has control. Like fear has had a grip on this planet for a very long time. And we've all agreed to that. Whether we agree with it consciously in this way, in this lifetime, we have all agreed to that fear on this planet at some point in some way, even subconsciously or unconsciously. And we can't actually reclaim our divine truth and love without facing the fear that has kept us bound to a way of existing in separation. And so I think that's why the goddess calls us, not because she's punishing us, not because we like the dark is, our mind says, oh, I'm going into the dark, right? Like, or I'm in the dark. But the reality is for the soul, it's just life. It just is what it is. We label it, right? Which is why we resist things, because the mind has this idea that it's a bad thing. And so it creates a story. And then what we're really reacting to is the story, not necessarily the actual circumstance from the soul perspective, which is fine. We're human. We get to do that. And I think we go through these experiences also so that we get to face those fears and those ways of separation from the divine within, the divine without, on purpose, to ascend, to evolve, to transmute those wounds back into wholeness. Because from my personal experience, I'm curious if this is similar to yours, is that what the goddess is asking us, asking me, is to bridge my humanity with my divinity, is to embody that divinity, is to come into all of life as sacred. But we can't do that without having to shed the ways we have identified with separation, both within and without. Does that resonate for you? Is that similar to your journey?
I would just describe it a little differently, but yes, it absolutely resonates in that, we have to remember, there's so much talk about heaven to earth. We have to remember what heaven to earth really means. We don't have to keep leaving body and going back to our soul expression to remember our divinity. And so to your point, the more we're in the embodiment of the divine as a sentient being here in this physical form, we're the bridge builders. This is a time like no other on the planet. And we and most of humanity are here to build that bridge of remembrance between our divinity and our earthly, fleshly. The density of the old is elevating. And what we're here to do is to build a bridge, and our remembrance is what brings us there. So fear and suffering really is a choice. What the goddess and spirit has shown me probably in the last few years is that fear actually is kind of an automated sequence of the matrix. Like, humanity doesn't actually hold the frequency naturally of fear. It's not in our original divine design. So we could go back to, like, the hunter-gatherer, the lion's coming, you must run. And she said to me, do not confuse adrenaline and your natural instinct to survive with fear.
Mm-hmm.
They're not the same. Fear is a catastrophizing experience where we, again, from the mind, ruminate into and usually it's in a future projection. This happened, that happened, that means that's going to happen, this is going to happen. And we're completely out of our center. But if we stay in the heart to the womb cohesion, and we can observe what is occurring around us, then we know we get to choose if we can simply observe what the experience is, or if we're going to move into the projection and the assimilation of the matrix, which is the illusion of fear, that it's not a natural harmonic in our body, which is probably why we feel so uncomfortable with it. So as we're in this evolving state of grace and we're building this bridge from our higher gnosis as the divine light beings in the embodiment of physical form, we get to choose over and over and over. And I'm not sitting here on some pedestal saying, like, oh, I am fearless and forever free. It's my intention. I have the capacity. Do I succumb to the wayward ways of my 3D self? Absolutely. Do I suffer greatly at my own hands? At my own hands when I do it? Absolutely. And this is when the goddess is remembered within me, that I'm like, I am choosing to look at this situation as something to fear. In this moment, in this breath, in this now moment, I can choose to attune back to my natural state, knowing that I am one with all things. I am the goddess. I am the creator. I am the universal intelligence and a fractal expression. None of this is real. So in this moment, in this breath, I get to choose my trust, my surrender, which means everything is always working out for me. Everything is always working out for all of us. We have enough years now, we can look at the sequence of our life, no matter how deep and dark and dirty and despairing it was. It always works out. It always has, it always will. All the fear, all the worry in the world never changes the outcome. So this has been the 3 steps that have been coming through these last 3 years as my life has disintegrated 1,000 times to be reborn 1,001 times. And each time I'm like, oh, how am I? What? Knees, goddess, please, all the things over and over. I mean, it's happening so rapidly now and each time I go through that, and then I come to the assimilation, and then I get to the other side, and here's the message. Everything always works out. All the worry in the world, fear never changes the outcome. And it's simply one step at a time. If we stay in the presence, we get to take the next step. And so our opportunity, I believe, in really becoming the truth of our already existent goddess energy is to slow everything down, to come into fierce, fierce presence of this now moment. And to remember maybe those 3 basic things. But when we are ruminating in the mind, we're catastrophizing futures, the past is depression, the future is anxiety, the only grace is in the now moment. And that is where the goddess lives. She's a fierce presence of light and dark, of love, of nurturing, of possibility. And she only exists in the presence. in the present moment. That's how we find her.
Mhm.
Stop.
And as we stop and as we slow down, we hear the voice of intuition, the voice of guidance, the voice of knowing, the voice of discernment, right? Which become louder than the fear because they're felt. And yes, we can notice the fear, right? But then for me, I think the mind can be very much in alignment with this wisdom of our body. And so then for me, it's a matter of then transmuting that fear into my truth and aligning my thoughts and beliefs to my soul's truth so that I am in that wholeness. So am I in that state? So when I have a fear, I literally go straight into it and look at it. What is it telling me? What is my belief? What is my experience here? Is this even real? Is this my soul's truth? What is the actual truth? As you were saying, of like then aligning to what is the deepest truth of my eternal nature here? And how can I align to that while also honoring my humanity and trust the inner guidance that is here for me at all times? But we have to stop to hear it. That's why we cultivate that relationship with the depths of ourselves so that that voice becomes louder. And then we know anytime a thought, because mind control is real. I've experienced it. Mind control is very real. And so that way, when the thought comes through, we can be like, is that even mine? And use our discernment. Is that my soul's truth? And do our inner work to align it to what is the soul's truth. And I know very well that I just feel like sharing this, a very short version of this. When you mentioned when you're being chased by like a lion or a wild animal, and there's a difference between instinct, right? Our primal nature, it's a primal response, then fear. I've actually experienced that. I was chased by a wild bear, roaring and running after me in the forest. I was completely alone. And I remember that feeling of I felt no fear. There was actually no fear, but my instinct took over. And I was able to then face the bear and roar and have an encounter, which was a magical encounter. Maybe another episode, I'll talk about that. But I remember thinking, wow, I completely trusted my body, my instincts, my primal nature, and I felt no fear, even while I was being chased by a bear. So why would I feel fear about something that hasn't actually even happened yet, right?
Yes. I've had one instance in my life, I'll spare the story, but where I was put to the edge of survival. And there is this thing that happens. I remember I locked eyes with the person, and there was this innate knowing of survival that took over, where I was like, I will literally do anything to protect my life. And I've never felt it since, and I had never felt it before, but I know it exists because I experienced it. And it's not even fear. It is an innate, fierce power of survival. We're survivors. Our innate system is to survive, but we are living in a system that has put us into a survival mode. And that's very different. And so I feel that the theme of what we've been speaking to a lot is about, being very aware of how the mind operates, the constructs of the mind. Our minds are very programmed. We've been very programmed generationally in my belief system for fear. And we've been, they started just deconstructing and taking away the goddess and the energetics of the goddess and the power of the goddess, like that is further and further and further and further behind. It was like the vision I'm being shown is them breaking down the statues, like she does not exist anymore, she will not stand before you. And then the erasing of the memory of it. I mean, we all know that there was many eons of time that, the gods and the goddesses were celebrated and honored in balance and in harmony. and we're understood as the expression of earth, and not personified as much as an energy that exists within earth, within nature, within that which is natural. And so if we look at history and we look at the thousands of years of deconstruction, when the programming and overlays of mind, bringing fear in, bringing survival in, destroying the nature of the true essence that is divine and innate within us, of goddess, God, even God, goddess expression. This is the moment. The reason we're having this conversation is that we have to unlearn all that has been programmed and distorted, and that space in between that brings us back to the holy and the whole home and truth of what is innate. So we're not learning something. We don't have to go find something. We have to deconstruct all the barriers that have been put between us and that which has always been. And that is true for our infinite power. That is true for our ability to create, it is true for everything, I believe. And I believe that's the pulse, if you will, of the great awakening that's before us. The new intelligence is how quickly can you unlearn everything you've learned to remember the innate truth that you will only access through the wisdom of your felt state.
And choosing the truth over the fear, and choosing the now over the past, right? Because the reality is that I think many women in particular, and men who have also had past lives that have been connected to the goddess, that there is a fear of reconnecting to her, even deeply unconscious fear. I have had that. I have had that fear of claiming I'm a priestess, of claiming I work with the goddess, of talking about the goddess, of talking about, the fact that she has been worshipped for so long, of talking about sexuality, of talking about sacredness of life, and the ways in which we did experience those lifetimes when the statues were torn down and people were persecuted as witches because they spoke truth, because they were connected to nature, because they worked with herbs, because they were powerful, because they didn't submit. And so they became witches. And those of us who are powerful and have a deep truth of nature and magic and connection and pleasure and sexuality and desire within us, within our wombs, within our hearts, within our bodies, we have to release and face those fears, as you were saying, and release them, because we have to, I look at it as a spiral process. We're constantly remembering and releasing and revealing, remembering, releasing, and revealing. We're remembering our truth and who we are and our divinity. We're releasing all that is not that over and over and over, because it's layers like an onion that we're constantly peeling. And then we're revealing our truth and revealing who we are and revealing our truest essence. And so I want to shift the conversation a little to pleasure, because we're talking about the ways in which the goddess has been denied and the fear, and that's just kind of where we intuitively went. And the reason why pleasure is such a radical act, right, is because it is honoring the sacredness of life. And we can't be in that survival mode and in pleasure at the same time. Like, our nervous system can't even be in the two at the same time. So let's talk about pleasure and how we even transition into embracing, like, we embrace the goddess through pleasure. So how would you encourage people to start making that transition? Or what are the ways that you, how do you define pleasure? And because to me, there's like egoic and soulful, and there's a lot around pleasure even. So how would you like to start talking about that?
Those are big questions. I believe that my answer is always the same for mostly everything, that we find it first in presence. Like, until we are present, nothing else occurs. And then through that presence, pleasure is such a spectrum. And when a person decides to get really quiet, stop the matrix of the mind and the fear, then they can take the breath into what feels good for me. Like, where do you find your pleasure? I feel like one of the first steps is often when I ask women to slow down, I also ask them to lean back. And that leaning back really into the feminine currency, right? So the masculine is the going after, the feminine is the receiving. So first, I think the first step for me is always you have to find that space of being so that you can become attuned to how you're feeling, which is how you access pleasure. And for me, or for my clients, I'm like, start finding beauty. Where do you find, like, what do you find beautiful? And it can be a star in the sky. It can be a flower on the side of the road. Optimally, it could be a gaze into your own eyes. Wouldn't that be amazing? But where do you start to find, like, this Gaia, this rich, lush, amazing planet we live in, is its entire expression desires to give us beauty and pleasure. And so when we stop seeking, to solve, we get to start being present to what is again. And so pleasure for me is first with beauty. What feels good? It's an attunement to the senses, right? So first into the senses so that we can be in body. What is your favorite smell? How do you, start tuning into even the caress of your own hand? Like, how can we amplify the feeling state of receiving? What tastes good? What smells good? And can you seek with your realize there's beauty all around us, right? What do you like? Attuning to beauty, attuning to the subtleties. But you have to be in a state of receiving to really allow these things to pleasure you. This is long before we get into the sex practices and really optimizing, the deeper, if you will, or more profound expressions of pleasure. So I think it's a stair step, and it begins in the moment you choose. I choose pleasure. So, you can eat your food like this, or you can you make every act an act of pleasure? It's all available, but you have to slow down and you have to be present. You have to be willing to receive it as such.
And in your body.
Huh?
In your body. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you have to embody. It's a somatic pleasure is a somatic experience. And so that's where pleasure begins. And then where pleasure ends is endless. And then when I believe when we really tune ourselves into the seeking and the embodiment and the desire to live a pleasure-filled life, then we will see it in all things. And then we get to use it as the barometer for choice, as we had talked about earlier. I said yes to this. Does this bring me pleasure? It might make sense. I should do this. It makes sense. It's a good business move. But dropping down into the actual pleasure zone and being in the embodiment, which we find in the womb space, does it light me? Does it pleasure me? I use my body as the parameter for what it is I say yes and no to these days, and it can change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And as you were saying that, okay, this is where it begins, I would say it never ends with me, because even when we're having sex, right, and we're in that sexual pleasure, it's because you feel each touch. It's because you gaze and connect to the soul of another. It's because your tongue notices every movement. It's because our senses are fully activated and we are fully present and our body is here now. It's just that maybe there are more of those than when you're just sitting in a chair and rubbing your skin. And so it's happening on different parts all at one time, right? Maybe it's accentuated. But my experience is that, yes, it's all still that simple sensual touch. It's all still that simple, right? Ecstatic communion. It's a communion. It's communion with yourself. It's communion with the moment, with what you're drinking, what you're eating, with breath, with life, because it is that union. I'm here now in union with what is around me, because then we can even experience, this is my experience with the goddess, I can experience ecstasy in the midst of extreme rage. I can experience ecstasy and pleasure while I'm grieving my eyes out, because I'm so alive. I feel so much pleasure and ecstasy coursing through me. I remember being shocked the first time I felt orgasmic, ecstatic pleasure in the midst of the biggest pain because it all became one, because I was in union. I was in communion, holy communion, fully present, fully here with everything in me open to receive all of it. And I think that's the mystery of the goddess, is that she is in all of it. And it is our consciousness that we direct into what is, that creates our experience. Is our consciousness here and now, or is it judging it? Or is it, in the past? Is it in the fear, right? Where is our consciousness? Because you can even be having sex and not be conscious and not be present and not experiencing pleasure.
Grocery list and know what happens next. And yeah, it's again, it's not an act of the mind. We're so blessed as human beings. Part of what makes us so different than any other soul expression and, whatever the belief systems are, I believe our soul has many experiences and different expressions, and different dimensions and such for senses. We have this capacity as human beings to have all of these senses and to feel. It's a very unique imprint for a soul's journey and its different expressions. And that means that we have this innate experience because we have senses to have pleasure. Souls line up all the time to get on this planet because being a human is pretty freaking awesome. And this is what makes us unique. We have this unique experience. And pleasure never ends. And every time you come to a new experience of it, and especially in a sexual experience, you might see that moment of pleasure as the orgasm, but really the magic of true pleasure happens after the orgasm, which most of us deny. And, we move on to the next thing like, well, that was great, let's go. But really, these are the moments that, when life is created, really. So there's the Big Bang, but it's that Big Bang is what takes us into the other states of being that are exemplified and multidimensional, where all the multidimensional beings, our access to it often is through the portal of pleasure, to get out of the mind and actually allow all the senses to take us through that doorway that is profound. It's how we create life, and we can create anything in it. And so it is a beautiful, a powerful expression to be reclaimed by humanity. And there's a lot of inversions. We're denied pleasure. Pleasure's made to be bad. Who do you think you are? Get working, get back on the wheel. Oh, you took a longer than 1 week vacation. How dare you? Oh, there's all these labels when people really own their pleasure, the diversion of the external and the lock of the 3D and the old ways of being is to deny, dismiss, and judge when someone is really in the full expression and prioritizing their pleasure because they know it is the foundation for creation of all things.
And or false forms of pleasure, right? Where people are like, well, I'm going to get pleasure from being on social media. I'm going to get false connection, or I'm addicted to this technology, so I'm getting pleasure from that, when the reality is it's not actually
pleasure and
pleasure.
Dopamine hits are not, dopamine is part of the pleasure we experience. But again, it is an artificial assimilation. And, we get these pleasures too, these artificial assimilations of pleasures from, the overabundance of sugar and processed foods, from, the addictive things people perceive they're getting it from alcohol, or for, the things, the artificials that we're taking in to try and get another hit of dopamine, when really the true experience is when all of those the chemistry comes together, which can only be actualized when the body is on board. You're not just feeding the chemistry of the mind, but you're allowing the senses to naturally bring in your dopamines and your serotonins, and creating it in balance
Versus numbing.
Versus what?
Versus numbing them, right? Which is what a lot of that, including sugar, does. Is it actually numbs the yeah, nerve endings and all the things. And yeah, yeah. And I want us to start steering toward, as we wrap up, like what would you recommend? Because, when we're in the survival mode, when we're feeling guilty for not being productive, when we're being told, right? Like, oh, you're lazy if you just lounge and stare and do nothing. It's essential, right? Like we know that's essential. We know that's medicine. We know that's how we connect. It's how we hear. But that's not what we're told. And that's not what society says. And there are a lot of fears around that and judgments around that, as you were saying. And so how would you, for our listeners, what's the gateway into what you offer as a pleasure priestess? What's the gateway for people to start tapping into, to start connecting to more of, you mentioned the pleasure through the body, but more of that connection with the goddess even?
So what's the pathway to connect with the goddess?
Yeah, if you were to leave with a piece of advice or an actual practical suggestion, it's kind of a big question, but whatever intuitively comes to you.
Well, what's coming in intuitively is you have to break pattern. If you want to experience something different, you have to break the pattern of your familiarity to become something different. So I would say one of the greatest, first steps would be look at your life, look at your schedule, and look how you're expending your time, and where is pleasure, and where is your presence in that. Do you get up first thing in the morning? Do you, run out the door? Do you get on your phone and start plugging into the dopamine hits? Like what is your routine, and where can you break the pattern in the routine to go to nature? Nature is, I believe, the quickest conduit to connecting into the sacred self. Go touch a tree, go put your feet on the earth, take 30 seconds and be really, or 30 minutes and be really present to that with the question in your heart, please, Mama Gaia, please, dear earth, support me in the remembrance. When you ask for something to be made clear within your body, your divinity will come and will show you how. But you have to create the space to stop the hamster wheel. And you have to create the space to be able to drop down into that womb space, to be able to listen for the guidance. Practical thing, start to activate your senses. Here's a really easy one for pleasure. And for honoring yourself as the goddess, when you get out of the shower, you like slapping the lotion on, I got to get out the door, or even just finding a really sensual, beautiful oil that delights your senses, and putting it in your hands and rubbing your hands together and just feeling like I am anointing this goddess temple. And can you apply your oil and your lotion as if you were applying it to a lover? Like, if we start tuning our daily experiences with the intention of activating pleasure, it is amazing. Like, washing dishes can get really sexy, but it has to be an intention and an attunement, and to start, and none of it's external. It's really not. The practice of getting there is an internal. It's a decision. It's a desire. It's making it can be small changes or grand changes. I am the goddess, and I choose to be remembered in that. And then you begin to treat yourself differently. You begin to see yourself differently. You begin to react and behave and speak differently. When she comes to life as a remembrance within you, you become something that is different, and people notice. And how you treat others and speak to others, it softens. It becomes more feminine. You become more present, and people become more present in your energy. They become more present to you. So we slow down, we take one step at a time, and you take how can I activate my senses today? Can I see beauty? Can I see the beauty in myself? Find one thing about yourself that's beautiful, whatever it is. And sometimes that's hard. And if it's like, oh, I just got my nails done, I think my nails are beautiful. Great. Start there and work your way up.
Mm-hmm. Reminds me of many years ago when I was struggling with a lot of body shame. And I wrote this blog post, And I was like, what if we looked at ourselves the way we look at a rose? Right? Because when I look at a rose, I'm not looking for its faults. I'm not like, oh, where's that leaf not perfect? Where's that color off, right? Like I'm looking at a rose and I'm in awe and I'm smelling it and I'm taking it in and I'm looking at it. I'm like, oh, I love you. You're so gorgeous. You're so beautiful. And I'm just looking at each petal. What if we looked at ourselves that way? And it shifted everything for me. Like, what if I just look at myself that way? What if I look for the beauty, as you were saying, right? Looking for the beauty instead of looking for the faults. What if I switch that? And then, as you said, break the pattern? Because if the pattern is to look for the faults, if the pattern is to hurry, if the pattern is to whatever that pattern is, look for the dopamine hit. We do have to break it, and that requires discomfort. And the only way to get through transformation is by being uncomfortable. I think one of my very first episodes was on that. Embrace the discomfort of transformation, because we cannot transform and expect to stay comfortable. And it's the mind that seeks the comfort. The soul's like, hooray! Finally, right? I get to just be present and in the moment and experience what I've always wanted to experience. And the ego's like, but I'm not doing that thing. And I got to check that off my to-do list. And I got to, right, fit all these parameters.
Yeah. And I think there's something important that really wants to come through here too, is, when we talk about going from fear to love, or we talk about going from, shame to full acceptance, like those are big gaps. And I think this is where in spiritual communities and spiritual bypassing, we lose people a lot of times, because it's like, well, if it was that easy just to, I love everybody and I fear nothing, or I'm beautiful and I see only, if it was that easy, we'd have done it by now. But the truth, and I love David Hawkins, or the power versus force chart of like the emotional frequency, shame down here, enlightenment up here. The stair step to any of this is first neutral. So as we're unlearning the old things and we're unlearning the old, fear, and coming into the space of love, or dismissal, denial completely of self or of the goddess or of beauty or of pleasure or of, when we're in there's nowhere to go, I've got none of it, then you have to walk up the stair step and begin to simply no longer accept the old. I will not talk to myself that way. That's just it for today. Let's start there. I will not speak negatively of myself. I will choose for this next hour to fear nothing and stay neutral. Neutral is a state of grace where everything becomes possible. So, depending on where on the spectrum you're living in your pleasure or not, your fear or your love, the starting point is to decide, and it's to take small actions and choices each day to begin to become something different. And so, I just think it's really important. Like, yes, would it be amazing to wake up and be in our full pleasure and love? Absolutely. And that is possible, but it's extremely rare. And instead, we have to stair step a walk. So one thing a day, changing your mind, catching, I used to play with this bracelet thing with my clients of like, every time you have a negative thought or a negative projection to yourself, you take the bracelet off one wrist, you change the thought, and you put it back on the other. And so the first 4 days of this, they're changing bracelets every 10 minutes, and then it's once an hour. And then they're like, I haven't changed my bracelet in a whole day. Great. Then and only then can we begin to stack in and layer in, like, and now I think I could actually come into a space where I'm going to begin to fall in love with this amazing creature that I am, right?
Because we have to be more devoted to that thing we want, that thing we feel called to, than the comfort. And I know for me, circling back as we start to close up, connecting to the goddess, I didn't know what the divine feminine was. None of the definitions around me made sense. This was back in 2010, 11. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand what divine feminine meant. I didn't know what goddess meant, but I knew something in me wanted it. I knew something in me wanted it. Sometimes that's all we have, and it's all we need to know. And if we open to that, then the rest, we're guided. As long as we're connecting to the self, like my way I'd love to close this is we connect to her through the self. We connect to her through the body. We connect to her through the earth. We connect to her through our heart. We connect that way. It's by going in that we connect. And so as we close off, any final comments and how people can reach you?
Yeah, my final comments are, again, well, I'll loop right back to where I started. If there is an innate desire within you to understand what the goddess is, what the divine feminine is, if there's an inquiry, it means she's waking up within you. It means you're already there and already on the path, and the path of discovery is before you. Stay in presence, take one step at a time, unlearn that which has separated you from your true essence, and know that it's a rebirth, it's a resurrection, it's a remembrance that is coming to life within you, not outside of you. And so let her evolve, because she is alive and she is ready for you to remember you. Best ways to reach me, lisamccardle.com. I have a complimentary discovery call there, a tea time, and I love to connect with women and find out where they are in the path. And we have to amplify the sisterhood. And I think that's the other final thing. We don't do this alone. We've done this alone long enough. We do not rise in the remembrance and awaken the goddess within and around us to save the essence of this planet. We do not do it alone. Yeah, we come together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true.
And Instagram is another good place to find me, Lisa McCardle _. So yeah.
Great. And I will put those in the notes below so you can find Lisa that way. And let us know your comments, your questions, anything this brings up for you, and trust the knowing inside, because she guided you here for a reason. Sending you lots of love. See you next week.